Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dr. Alana Coffey, and many of you already know me, but I'm just introducing myself for the sake of the recording of this video. Hi, Kendra. Thanks for joining us. So for some of you, I think this information is a review, but it's okay to review the information because it's just so important, especially since it's kind of a safety issue for us, both legally and sometimes actually, personally, because this topic is about families who are involved in the court system. And what that means is that we have really good people behaving very poorly for a certain period of time because they're fighting for their dreams and they're fighting for their children. They're sometimes fighting for property, but they're definitely in a bit of a dogfight. And these could be the nicest people on the planet, but it doesn't matter. They're in a serious fight. As opposed to, I have a girlfriend who is a criminal law defense attorney. Those are people who have done some shady stuff, but they're on their best behavior because they're trying to appeal to the judge to get out of trouble. So we have it flipped in this case. We have, families doing all kind of crazy things. And this is a discussion for us to know about those things, anticipate them, and try to avoid getting caught up in those things. So about 50 minutes of me just going super fast. Are you guys ready? Okay, and do feel free to put any kind of questions or comments or concerns in the chat. Let me see here. So I'm going to share my entire screen because I have most success with that. And this PowerPoint is meant to be very much it's just going to help me to keep my lines straight for myself. There's a lot of information here again, and we won't go over every single thing that you see on the slide. We're going to keep this at high level as much as possible. So let me see what I already have here. Okay. Drive safely, Yuki. Okay, so I also developed this. I came to be involved in the family court system because my mother was a family law paralegal when I was growing up. She was a single mom, and this is how she supported my sisters and I. And part of my sister's tuition to the Priory was actually paid for by a family law attorney because he understood that when women were divorced, one of the things that they faced often, especially at that time, we're much older now, but at that time, as the women realized a depression or a significant decrease in their income and their ability to provide properly for their children. So he was such a cool guy, George Dyer. He was like, part of your salary, BJ, is I will pay for, the private school tuition of your two younger daughters. I was already out of school, but this is one of the things that he did that I just thought is like, if we think about what are the things that we can do in the community to take care of each other outside the box, that was one of those things. And he remained a very dear person to our family until he passed. But my mother continued to work in family law with John Schmidtke, and he's still a practicing attorney. And so you may come across his name from time to time because we get a lot of referrals from John Schmidtke and his firm. His son has actually taken over a lot of his cases. So we all kind of grow up. Mom is retired now, and I do the work of a psychologist. So she had been retired for 5 years at the time that she and I put this PowerPoint together for the HPC, specifically for HPC affiliates. The purpose of this training is to educate and clarify legal terms and roles for you, increase your confidence to take these cases, increase your competence within the scope of practice, because those are two separate things. We can be super confident and still not be competent. And sometimes we're very competent, but not so confident. So I want you to be both because, again, this is a steady stream, especially if you're building your practices or you have a passion for this work. There's quite a bit of this work. Very few people specialize in it, although many people attempt it. Increase collaboration when appropriate. it is appropriate that therapists collaborate with attorneys, some cases, especially other therapists. We don't want to get subpoenaed to court, but we do collaborate. This is a different type of therapy. It's a team effort type therapy. Decrease our exposure to legal ramifications by like knowing some things. Okay. And then there are two other trainings that are scheduled, but not quite yet developed. But you're still going to hear me talk about some of these subjects nonetheless tonight. Marriage and paternity, divorce and separation, custody, court subpoena, and testimony is what we're going to cover mostly today. You know, what reasons do people have for getting married? I just want you to take, like a couple of minutes here, just a couple of seconds really, and think about like, why do people get married in the first place? And if not married fully, then at least why do they come together? On this list, certainly some of these things would have come up in your mind for love. And you think, well, of course, that's so obvious. But it wasn't always, excuse me, the way historically people did not always get married for love. That's actually really recent within the last couple of hundred years. Love was not actually the requirement. Companionship, to make a formal commitment because there are children. Sometimes people get married for financial reasons, sometimes just convenience, sometimes religion, family pressure, and tradition. This is just a list. I'm certain there are other reasons, but this was the short, quick list of why people get together in the first place. And that's going to be relevant when you start to do work with them. Because then you have to ask, well, if I'm in this case, and I'm being asked to work with the family that's involved with court, then it's like, well, why did people get divorced? What are the reasons for coming apart? And first off, they have unrealistic or unmet expectations. We expected this thing and then ended up getting this thing. We live in 2025, and at this point, we're still able to get divorces, which we should not take for granted. In other countries, it's much more difficult to get a divorce and sometimes even dangerous. But in the United States in 2025, it is still legal to get one. I want you to pin it again. Now, these pinnets, if you do any of my classes, um, some of the ones that I teach, you might teach yourself, but there's always a prompt to pin and personalize or personalize and pin because we want people to just kind of like think it through, right? But I'm going to go quickly because there's a lot of information. But if we had 2 hours, we would be having a discussion about this. So, what reasons do people have for having children but not getting married? Now, I know that in your practice, you've seen, more and more of this. Even in our friend groups and our family groups, people do not automatically get married just because they're children. Keep in mind, a generation ago, this would have been taboo, no, shameful. But today, it's actually kind of normal and quite commonplace. So we do have legally, when you're working with a family, there are cohabitors and there are married people. According to Brooks research, a primary reason is an unintended birth. Typically, there's a baby involved. If we're called to work with a court case, it will have something to do with custody. There might be financials, and sometimes people just don't get married based on their principles. Cohabitation tends to have a negative effect or impact on children because cohabitors are serially so stable. Their stability is lacking. So it's easier for people to come apart. It's easier for them to just move on as opposed to getting a divorce, which is expensive and people tend to think twice or three times or do something about it, like going to therapy or something like that. But we're finding when we're working with someone is there's some emotional effects. So if a person is the one that's been left behind, and we call this the defendant, if you do see a legal brief, you will see on that front page who's the defendant. That's usually the person that was left behind. They've got feelings that lawyers have a hard time dealing with. Judges are like, you guys need to go into therapy, and hence us. So, of course, we know about the stages of grief, right? Shock, denial, confusion, anger, the rest. But then there's also this self-destructive bit. Sometimes we don't get the family or the couple or the individual until after they've done something foolish. Whether they drank too much or crashed a car or, they acted out in front of somebody and got themselves recorded, but they did something self-destructive in reaction to their grief and pain. And then this causes a secondary issue. We have a lot of families who are not only in family court, but they're also in criminal court because, they broke a door or did something like that. So sometimes they've got two engagements with court, two different courts. People who've been left feel very embarrassed. They're ashamed. They feel alone, empty, and abandoned. And when people with kids are feeling abandoned, they tend to get especially clingy to children. So we'll have one side saying, wow, she didn't act all that caring all this time, but now that there's a divorce, all of a sudden she's a mother of the year. This kind of statement comes up. Cognitive distortions, you folks all know what those are. But people jump to conclusions and engage in black and white thinking when they've been left behind. And just because a person thinks a thing doesn't mean it's a true thing. For example, if somebody gets left behind, they may conclude, oh, you must be having an affair, and then they begin to act that way. But that's not necessarily what is happening. And then, of course, human nature, people can become quite vengeful and vindictive. And sometimes that's what is fueling a self-destruction. This is a person who's been left behind. The person who leaves is called the plaintiff on the legal paperwork. They're the ones who filed for divorce. And they, of course, have already done the grieving part. Sometimes I read one statistic is that it takes up to 2 years before a person, finally does it. And it's many, many issues upon issue that they finally feel, I'm so calloused. I just got to do it. I don't have anything left. So they don't look as emotional. They can look like they're already in a place of acceptance, whereas this person is still going through confusion and anger and hurt. This person already looks like into the next stage of their life. They often, because they feel like they're right. They feel like they are doing the right thing, so they often feel quite justified. They feel relieved, like, whew, finally got that done. But then this comes with guilt, right? Because sometimes people are making vows, like they're making a promise to be with you forever. And here I am calling it, a divorce. So there's some guilt here. Of course, sadness. What's not mentioned here is, of course, they also feel a little shame. Ostracism from the community and family. Sometimes family says things like, why are you breaking up? Are you not thinking about the children? Things aren't that bad. Marriage is hard. You got to work at it. So, there's some scoldings and some pressure that goes along from the community here. And then, people then get defensive. And sometimes this defensiveness actually estranges this person from their support system, from their own parents or their friends and family. So there's dynamics that are happening beyond just the husband and wife or wife and husband and husband. Beyond the couple that's breaking up, there's many other dynamics. And then, of course, there's overcorrection, overcorrecting behavior where a person just kind of shuts down and has to get really perfect. Here's a nod to, what does it look like when a person is contemplating change? And I usually include these kinds of slides so that even when you're talking with your patients, share this information because it's such a relief for a person to go, oh yeah, I was in pre-contemplation for the last, 2 to 5 years. And it took me a long time to contemplate what to do. I went to that one therapist and they, gave me some hope or what have you, or, a pastor or something like that. And then, the preparation to take action, that's only half the battle. And then actually taking action to, getting a separation or divorce is very big. And then this maintenance, on average, domestic violence, when people are trying to leave those relationships, it takes 7 attempts on average before a person actually leaves. So this is kind of a very validating slide for our clients, something that we ourselves can keep in mind because our patients come to us at one of these stages, somewhere along the line. Of course, always remembering that our patients are in one of these stages too. And this affects the quality of decisions that they make. I put this in here because if you're working with someone who's involved in the court system, they're often not in a place of acceptance. Like, oh, I know, and this is going to be better for me and my family, and it was the right thing to do. That's high thinking. Most of the people that we're dealing with are somewhere here. Hurt, relapse back into denial. They're all in this place. And our job is to kind of gently nudge them over here so that they can get healthy for themselves and their children. This is I like to use this slide because kids are in this as well. Now, we might have children who are here and this starts to affect their schooling. This starts to affect, their relationships with their peers and siblings and their other parent. So again, the work is so big. It's so big because we are, working on stuff not just for that family, but their whole system, right? We might have a parent who's over here in acceptance, but a child who's here. This actually causes a conflict between these two, right? A little bit. So just being aware that not everybody's in the same stage at the same time. Clinical maladies inside of a high conflict divorce. So when everybody is just like mentally well, we already have a strain and a challenge with these kinds of divorces. But, if you add an endogenous, which means a chemical depression or anxiety, or, a family history of substance abuse or schizophrenia, or, explosive anger disorder, to also a person coming apart, these things make our job especially sensitive. And then we'll talk about like what we recommend here. Just having a quick look at how old the children are at the age typically when their parents get divorced. Now, this is like early 2000s. I'm sure it shifted a little bit, but 25% of the divorced people who have kids, those kids are 5 to 9 years old. So when you interview with us and we're like, do you see kids? Part of it is because we know there's a whole bunch of kids who are having this issue. They're struggling a bit. Um, the next, chunk of time is here between 19 and 10, right? So this is making up another like, 23%. So like half of the divorcing people are the ones with kids, those poor babies, right? And then you've got, these other folks here. We see um, we see them coming in less. It's not because of custody. That's why they're coming in for other reasons. So this big chunk here is custody. And I don't know if you folks have heard of gray divorces. But gray divorces are people who are getting divorced after they've been married for 50 years or more. Or no, they're 50 years old and getting divorced then, but they've been together for decades. So it's considered like a gray divorce. So what's the problem? Technically speaking, separating and getting a divorce and becoming a happier person because you feel free and you no longer have to argue with this individual all the time should be a good thing. And in fact, it actually is a good thing for many people. Some children are like, I enjoy my parents so much more because they're happier. I enjoy my parents so much more because they're not yelling and fighting all the time. The assumption is that divorce is bad for kids. That's a wrong assumption. What's bad for children or what hurts them and has a negative impact are these conflicts, the high conflicts. This kind of fighting is very difficult for children. Part of a high conflict is this thing called alienation. Now, I know lots of people know what alienation is, but let's give it a definition because I hear this word getting tossed around kind of a lot. But alienation is the act of one parent alienating a child from the other parent by making disparaging remarks or making that child feel like they have to be afraid of the other person. And it is distinctly designed to distance that child from that other adult. So it is a type of parental interference. And in some cases, it really is a type of child abuse. It is abusive to do that. And you can't believe like how subtly that happens. Even people who are not getting a divorce estrange their children. It's like, oh, you know how your dad is, or your mom's always like that. So these kinds of statements can be weaponized and used in a heightened way when people are in high conflict. Oftentimes people do it innocently and they don't even realize they've done it. But in some cases, Doug Darnell's book is really about when people aggressively use this alienation. And it makes children align oftentimes with the stronger parent because they're just like, I'm sorry, mom, but I got to go with dad because that's what I got to do. So, sometimes it's used very effectively to separate parents from their children until those children grow up. And then there can be, a hell to pay when they're like, why did you do that to me when I was a child? Keep me from my mom or dad. Now, estrangement's different. Estrangement is when a parent is odd all by themselves and the child don't want to hang out with that parent, not because the other parent said so, but they don't want to hang out with this parent because this parent themselves is, strange. And strange means, they could be disrespectful to the other parent. Kids tend to care about fairness and kids tend to be protective of their family. So if somebody's talking stink about one of their family members, they, have an opinion about that. So estrangement that way, estrangement, children know when they're in a dangerous situation. So, I have one child say, dad drinks and drives, another child that says, like mom falls asleep. So, just parents can estrange their own self from their children. When that's done, though, guess what this parent does? When the kids say, "Oh, I don't want to hang out with you," they often blame the other parent for alienating when it's their own self who's done it. So being very accountable for their behavior. Part of us as therapists, we're in the position of helping parents self-reflect and see maybe how they are contributing um, to, their relationship or their strained relationship with their child. And you might be thinking like, why is this an issue? We're going to talk a little bit about this here. How much does it cost and how long does it take? So, you might have to squint a little bit because I had to get all of this on the slides. But when people have a divorce or a custody battle, if they can do it themselves, we call that kitchen table divorces. And that's like you can get the papers online, and there is a certain percentage of the population who fill those out, sign them, and boom, they're done. But that's typically people who say things like, I can't afford it, so we'll just do it ourselves. The next level up is mediation when you hire one attorney and they sit down and they help both parties understand what the laws are and what, they're entitled to. Same like collaborative practice, they hire their own individual lawyers and they can come and have that conversation. And then the next layer up is a lawyer negotiation. Now, this is when we've got like basically lawyers trying to fight it out. And they're extremely competitive and they're extremely expensive. But arbitration is when things kind of get in front of, we have hearings, things get in front of a judge, and the lawyers and the judges and the parents try to come up with an agreement. If that doesn't work, then people go to trial. And when people go to trial, that's when divorces start to cost tens of thousands of dollars. I spoke with a woman today, and her divorce cost $100,000. And it was a divorce and one child. They were just fighting over one child. Um, and that child today has a lot of challenges, and that's why she comes to therapy because she's worried about him. He's an adult, and he was injured during this high conflict case that they had. So, so why do parents fight? You know, why are they fighting? Well, in the state of Hawaii, we have what's called a no-fault court, and that means a no-fault divorce. So you don't prove, oh, he had an affair or she did this or that. It's just, if anybody can ask for a divorce and pretty much get one, and you don't have to prove anything. Um, and then there's things that are like alimony and child support. And alimony and, well, especially child support is determined based on how much time each parent has with the child. So it used to be that oftentimes the moms would get most of the time with the children. And so they got things like alimony for being married and child support for raising the children. And then people began to wonder, well, how come? Moms work, so why does dad have to be the one that goes to work? And so things kind of changed a little bit, sort of like in the 90s, where we saw more dads getting, custody and moms getting, less time. It almost looked 50-50 split there for a while. And since then, the court system goes back and forth. It swings back and forth. And sometimes people are like, I feel like I can do a better job of raising these children because I'm the more stable one. I'm the one with the house. I'm the one with X, Y, or Z. So I should have more. And I don't want to pay my co-parent who I'm mad at or I blame, for doing something else, any of my money. So then people start going into court fighting over those things. And it almost starts to look like not a no fault case. So people are going into court and they're making all these claims of infidelity, of theft, of poor character, of abuse, and they're making all of these claims which may or may not be true. And sometimes what happens, this is where we as therapists get involved, is the judge will say, you know what, these people need some sort of therapy. And the attorneys are like, great, we're going to refer them to therapy. And then they come and see us guys. And when they get to us, they're not your typical client that's like, can you help me feel better? When they get to us, they're like telling on each other. All they want, well, it's not all they want, but they're so upset. All they can really see is the desire and the pressure to tell their story about how they're not to blame and how the other person kind of is. So, therapists who are like new to this work or new to the field will hear their very passionate client and be like, you poor thing, you're being taken advantage of. You poor thing, you're being robbed. You poor thing. And then they can convert their therapist into an activist. They can convert their therapist into a crusader on their behalf. And some therapists lose their objectivity at this time. And they start writing letters to court and to judges and to lawyers, to other therapists, based solely on the word of their client. You can imagine the vulnerability that puts us in. We don't have evidence, we don't have objectivity, and we don't have a triangulated source of data. So I just want to really caution everyone that no matter how convincing they are, we still need to do our due diligence and collect our own evidence. So when your approach for reunification therapy, there's so much that I want to talk to you about that it's almost its separate training. So I'm going to skip over this and save it for at the end if we have time, because it's its whole own type of therapy, and it's an important job. But I'm going to skip past this for now. Before I do that, are there any comments or questions in the chat about what I just went over just now?
I just had a question about the statistic of the children's age for divorce. Is it
Hmm.
for US or it's globally worldwide
That is US.
US?
Yes.
Thank you.
And and it's probably shifted and changed because that slide's fairly old and it does differ from state to state. So these cases, the law is actually practiced differently from state to state. So, so when a family wants to, Hawaii has a lot of people who are transient. They aren't born and raised here, so they have children. They get into trouble with their partner. They're like, I'm going to go home to be with my family in California or Utah or New York or even international. And boy, is that hard because now then people are really cautious because it looks like they could flee. And that does happen, especially from the state of Hawaii. People leave and they take their children and they're never seen again. So it's a very sensitive issue, but it's from state to state. The laws differ. Some states they don't have no fault. They actually have fault divorces where you can prove that your co-parent is somehow at fault and you can get different things for that. So it's a good question.
Thank you. We just
Yeah.
have same situation in Ukraine now because a lot of people leave the country because of the war, and we have a special MIKK, it's international mediation like group which helps people all over the world. If somebody took your child and
Yes.
get it out of your country, so they help to work with Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Family and Children, and they work to get people like these kids back home.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's really scary. We just had a case in Honolulu where a little boy had been missing 6 or 7 years and his mother had taken him. And, from the mom's perspective, depending on where she's coming from, this is my child, I'm going to take him, and sometimes mothers leave because they feel like the fathers are dangerous or abusive like that. So it gets to be, kind of dicey. And again, we don't know, and we certainly don't want to keep someone in harm's way. We just want to make sure they're leaving in the right way. And there is a right way to leave if you think that the child and yourself are at risk. But there's a lot of moving parts here. Excuse me, lots of things to consider. I like to think of this like, where's my role? When people are complaining with each other about their job or their neighbor or them mates, if it's a complaint, yeah, that's therapy. That's what we're here for. We're good for that. When it's a grievance, that elevates a little bit more to the need of advocacy. Maybe they need to consult an attorney or a mediator. They have a problem that needs to be solved at that level. If they are making allegations, if they're actually making allegations of abuse or worse, that's police and CPS. That's not our lane. It's really nice that it's so clear. But sometimes we want to get in there and solve it. And I tell people right up front, I'm not, I'm a mandated reporter and I can't solve all of the things. So if that comes up, I'm telling. Um, and so who do we tell and who's who? And the reason why this is important is because the clients don't know. And let me just tell you, some of the attorneys don't know either. They just don't know. They're just willy-nilly. Go to coffee for parent coordination. I don't do parent coordination, and I'll tell you what that is. So we know that we have a judge. Oftentimes, the judges do not make judgments. They don't want to make a judgment. They're pushing the families back. Second, they're pushing the families back because they want the families to come to an agreement themselves, which is actually much more sustainable. It's just that these folks aren't that sophisticated. So they often don't know what they're agreeing to, or they don't know how to debate it even. But the judges do not like to make a judgment as a judge says, you do this, 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 and that, pal, right? But they kind of shy away from doing that. They ask the lawyers to work the case as much as they can before they get to the point of making a judgment. But lawyers are paid, $350 an hour. And so they're not necessarily incentivized to be one and done. I know, isn't that terrible? I am so jaded, but they make a lot of money out of all the attorneys. These are some of the most highest paid ones besides the criminal law attorneys. Pro se means when a person represents themselves. And there's this saying, um, if you represent yourself in a court of law, then you have I gotta find the saying, but it's not recommended, right? Because it's people can get turned around very easily to represent yourself in a court of law, especially against an attorney. If two individuals are pro se, that's one thing, but an attorney is really the safest way to go, even at that expense. Mediators. Okay, so there's some mediators in town. I'm going to do a shout out to Katie Bennett. It's the family mediation Hawaii. And what she does is, I think she just takes a flat fee and really tries to help the family work through these things. But they have to kind of commit to getting it done. They have to commit to wanting a solution and understanding and expecting a solution to be had without too much battling. So there are mediators in town who are trying to help families in this way. Um, Custody evaluators, fact finders, guardian ad litems, parent coordinators. So we got to look at this chart as best we can. Um, Parent coordinator. This person may or may not even be a mental health professional. Their job, the parent coordinator's job, is to do what a judge does not, to do what a judge does. They actually act as tiebreaker. So they will, and they're not an insurance covered job. This is a service that people pay out of pocket for. It can be expensive. They're outside the court, and they help families when they can't agree post decree. After the decree, then they will go to a parent coordinator. But way before that, we have someone called a custody, a guardian ad litem. So this is an attorney who is appointed to represent the children. Usually, like if I contract an attorney, that's my attorney. That attorney does not actually represent my children. And it certainly doesn't represent my, spouse or my co-parent. But we have people coming in and they're like, "Oh, I talked to my husband's attorney." I'm like, "Well, what'd you do that for?" That person isn't representing you. They're representing their client's interest, period. So sometimes we have a case where it's like, mom's got an attorney, dad's got an attorney, but the babies don't have an attorney. So a custody guardian ad litem or a GAL is appointed to represent the best interests of those kids. And this is typically done when the cases are high conflict, like or really sensitive cases, or there's abuse, or foster kids, or there's some other issue. It's not your forward divorce. There's something else that's happening when a guardian ad litem is on the case. And we do a lot of work with guardian ad litems. They're rare. They're not the common, they're not the norm. Custody evaluators and fact finders, when there is a custody dispute, these guys are the norm. Insurance does not pay for them. They are, um, a $10,000 down payment each parent for these folks. And these folks, so you get a custody evaluator, they're going to interview all kinds of people, teachers, therapists, kids, parents, grandparents, whoever, and they're going to try to evaluate what is custody. And you see on the bottom there the authority that these people have. It's written into law, right? So the revised statutes are right there, Hawaii revised statutes, if you want to look further into it. And then the fact finders, though, they're a little bit closer to being a judge or an attorney, and they're just looking at facts. Just tell me what. Whereas a custody evaluator might do more interviews, the fact finders are like following a paper trail. So when people say, "Oh, you weren't there," it's easy to find. It's like, here's the timestamp, here's a photo. This is what fact finders are interested in doing. They don't necessarily make custody recommendations. That goes to the custody evaluator. They're just looking for information. The therapist, we're none of that. But people try to put that us in that position because we are covered by insurance. Families can afford us, and and people just don't know. So they come in and they're like, we've been working together for 6 months. Can you please be the one to tell the judge that I'm a nice person? That is not our job. Our job is to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so glad I was able to help you reduce your anxiety or your depression. Now you need to let the people who are trained to do this work. That really is their work. And if there's ever any time that you have any kind of confusion about that, consult with me at Honolulu Psychology Collective. It's part of my support of you, but we cannot and should not make custody recommendations. And judges, they used to try to trick us. They'd be like, "Oh, can't you just say?" No, we can't just say, right? It puts us in, and it's what is the ethical underpinning of that? Dual relationship. When we started as neutral people who were there for confidentiality and mental health. And all of a sudden, halfway, you want to switch our role. That's a dual role. So we can get out of it that way and just say, no, thank you. I won't participate. That doesn't mean that we don't talk to a custody evaluator about the things that we witness only, not our opinion. It's yes, mom came to an appointment drunk. Yes, dad did not show up to 3 appointments. We provide concrete things that we observe, not opinions. We can get sued for opinions, but not for facts. Okay. And a mediator, as I mentioned, those are typically attorneys who are trained to help these folks have a conversation about what the law is. The law is very different than what mental health is, right? So we are mental health. The lawyers got to go do their thing. These are totally different things. Okay. Okay. Just went through all those things. Okay. You're going to come up oftentimes with custody. And one parent's going to be like, can you work with me and my kid? And if you know that there's, and Amy and Mylani and the people who triage are pretty good at catching it, but every now and then somebody slips through and you got to catch it. But if you know, oh, you guys are separated, who has custody? And you got to know what custody means. If people who have never been married, neither one of them has custody, and any one of them can take those children and go. They don't have any legal claim over the child, which is one of the reasons why people file for paternity, is so that you can file for paternity and establish legal custody over your child. So, physical custody just means how much time this child is physically with either parent. Half, some, it can be all different kind of ways. Legal is usually split half half. We have legal custody and the other one has physical custody. That means that all the decisions have to be made by both parents. Check it out. If they both have custody, that impacts us because that means that we need consent from both legal parents, legal guardians. And this tiebreaker, do you remember who gets to do that if they can't decide? The parent coordinator, who is, typically paid about $200 to $250 an hour for their consultation. They are not covered by insurance. So again, sometimes people come into therapy and ask us to try to do this for them. There's uncontested divorces. Those are your kitchen table divorces. Contested divorces, which are the ones we're talking about today. Custody evaluation and fact finding. Guardian ad litems sometimes add 2 cents to who should get custody. And types of time sharing schedules. Visitation or time sharing. We don't use the word visitation when we're talking about parents, although sometimes they will refer to visitation, but it's their child. Supervised visitation. These things come up when there's an allegation of abuse or a substantiated abuse, typically done at the PACT Visitation Center. Private professional supervisors exist. So sometimes we're trying to do some therapy with the family, but they're barred somehow, either by TRO or an order for supervised visitation. They can come on the screen. We can do it that way. And sometimes I've had people come to family therapy in my office, but they're being escorted by a private supervisor. The children are. We don't stop doing therapy in these cases. We still are trying to make sure that there's a healthy relationship possible. Transitions, this is a really big issue for families. We have one parent that's, oh, you poor thing, you gotta go, and it makes it really hard for children to get on with their day. So this is a prime a therapeutic issue. Let me see here. So just wanting you to know, because we're just about going to round this out now, who you work for. If a family comes to see you, you work for that individual family, period. We do not work for the attorneys, judges, courts, or any of that. Whoever's name signs our forms, that's who our client is. So if we speak to these folks, we need to get written consent, and it's limited. We are not subject to, just because our name might be on the court papers. My name's always on the court papers. It's like, go to coffee for such and thing. And in the beginning, they used to call, can you take this case? They would tell me about the case. And then I would take these cases, and now they're just like, go to coffee. So they don't even call and consult anymore. So sometimes I do push back, but we're not obligated to do any of that. Court subpoena, I recommend if you get subpoenaed, let's call and let's have a discussion because there is a way to handle it. You may go and testify as an expert, which means you have knowledge on the subject. You might be a witness testimony because you have experience or knowledge about a specific case. You might choose to do that, or you might choose to say, I really cannot, it's not appropriate. And then we can talk about how you can, call the judge and maybe get yourself out of that. Working with temporary restraining orders, this is something also that you can call us directly and ask, hey, what do I do if there's a TRO or restraining order? Okay. Let me see here. We are actually right through this case, and just like I thought, we won't be able to get to the reunification therapy piece because it's a big piece, but we got through most of what I wanted to get through today, which is, just the overview and how to keep yourself safe. Do know when to quit or refer a case. It's an important part of being a clinician. Get consultation, lots of it, if you need it. What 5 things discussed in this training will you use in your work? And what next? What would you like to do next? We can talk about working with alienated and estranged children because that's part of the reunification piece, right? I always want to end with it's hard work. What we do, it's good work. We're trained. If you're in this thing here and we're having a conversation, you're trained and you're very much needed and you can help. We can all help. And we can keep ourselves pretty safe as long as we do consultation and stay in our lane. And so you saw that one chart with all those lanes, and ours is just really narrow. It's like being in a baton race. We pass the baton to some other players, and those were some of the other players because it's not all ours to do. And I think, Yuki actually does some of this work. So, Yuki, can you talk a little bit about what you do?
I kind of do the when I get appointed to it. I've done more so on the neighbor islands, but I've taken a couple cases on Oahu and now Maui, but I do custody evaluations as well as fact finding.
Mhm.
Um, I recently, I told Dr. Coffee, I recently got asked to do reunification therapy. Or actually one of the um attorneys that I work with on Hawai'i Island, he's really good because then, once you start doing this kind of work, like there's lawyers that you kind of like build relationships with. So he'll just call me. I think his paralegal just called me up and they're like, "Hey Yuki, do you know, can you do reunification therapy or do you know of anybody that can do it?" We um they had one previously that was court ordered. It didn't work out. So mom's looking, the judge told them, go out, give me names and come back to court with it. So I didn't really know, I don't really know too much about it. And I didn't want to like put myself out there, but it's
Yeah.
it's good work, but I've gotten I didn't really get formalized training on the custody evaluation. I just got, I just kind of I had a mentor. She kind of like had me kind of following the ropes about it, and now I'm kind of just circuit like kind of looking in the US to kind of doing like custody evaluation trainings to
Mm.
kind of further my skills. It's a passion of mine. I love the work, but it's very you have to be on it, and it's a different role from being a therapist where it's very factual. You really have to be succinct in your writings and your recommendations. You have to be able to back it up why you saying what you're seeing in the evaluation. So
Yeah.
it was a huge learning curve for me because I didn't really, when I got my license, I didn't really know what to do with it. So I kind of just fell into the work of the custody evaluation, but I kind of like it. It's kind of good. It grew my skills. So I mean, if you're interested, it's actually a good it's a good field. But definitely there I have a lot to grow.
Yeah. And we can grow together too and be of assistance. I think there's Stacy Fukuhara, Barkley, and one of our affiliates, Stephanie, her sister is partners with Stacy Fukuhara, so they work together, and we've done a lot of work with Stacy over the years. So she's always putting out trainings. She works closely with Katie as well because we know we kind of really need to support each other if we're going to do good work in the community. And maybe we can talk next time about a little bit more about the reunification therapy, like how to do it because this is a specific type of therapy where we don't just work with the child and one parent, right? This is what parents expect. But in this kind of therapy, we have to go get the other parent. We have to deal with the estranged parent and the preferred parent and get them to work together. And if they don't want it, it's already a bust. So it's a different type of therapy, very active and engaged. So. So I'm
Okay.
gonna we're about done. It's about 7. I try to keep these things short so that I can get you coming back so that you know that you'll be done on time. But before I just kind of end, I'm gonna say thanks to everybody and stop the recording.